Scripture this morning comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 35, verses 1 through 10. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The deserts shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it will be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone who has lived with or helped to raise a 3-year-old knows all too well about defiance. Mine. No. I do it. Such acts of defiance on the part of the otherwise charming little person are often precipitated by occasions of great urgency, such as when mom or dad expects the little one to wear pants, or when the child insists with increasing urgency that, yes, it is correct to go out in public with one foot with a sock and one foot without a sock, or the hunger strike that unexpectedly happens in the high chair when the food that your precious toddler has adored and would eat at every meal all of a sudden is anathema. And you are clearly trying to poison him or her when you innocently serve it once again, expecting to be thanked, but instead receive howls of defiant rage at your gall at offering something that until yesterday was the favorite food in the world. Of course, let's not let parents off the hook here too easily either. I recall once when I was much younger and much stupider, defiantly insisting to our daughter that yes, she would eat at least a few bites of that pork chop, and made her sit at the dinner table for 2 hours, to many tears, and giving her a memory that now chagrins and shames me. My mother, before she died, once said she didn't have many regrets, but one of them was that she too often made a big deal over things with her children that really weren't that important after all. But she said that not of the toddler years, but of the teenage years, when escalating mutual angry defiance too often marked too many occasions that in retrospect just weren't that crucial. It's one of God's good gifts that child rearing is generally for the young, but it is one of God's ironies that sometimes wisdom about parenting comes long after when you really could have used it. But I guess that's why God also made grandparents. Defiance. Defiance. This third in our Advent sermon series on the words and visions of the prophet Isaiah challenges us to think about the things that are important to our faith. And one of these things I would maintain is indeed defiance. You won't usually find it on a list of Christian virtues because too often we tend to think of being Christian as being somehow more or less equivalent to always being nice and affable and jolly, particularly at this time of year. But my friends, defiance can indeed be a key Christian virtue and one that you and I should sometimes cultivate. Consider our scripture for today from Isaiah. Last week I said that Isaiah was writing at a time when the southern kingdom of Israel was menaced by Assyria. Assyria had already conquered the northern kingdom, and Isaiah called on the kings of the southern kingdom to stop hurting the poor, to stop turning a blind eye to the danger headed their way, to stop lining their own pockets instead of caring for the poor and the immigrant. But those calls were not heeded. And just before today's scripture, Isaiah delivers his most dire warning about what will happen to a nation whose rulers no longer rule righteously. And you might think that he would follow those terrible warnings with a call to be afraid. Be very afraid. Be very fearful about what is about to happen, but he doesn't. No, in a remarkable act of defiance, he talks instead about what God can do and will yet do in a vision where deserts will unaccountably bloom and the feeble will be strengthened and danger will be replaced with delight. It's a vision that is indeed a defiant one because it refuses to give in to fearfulness. A pastor by the name of Terry Ott says this about such defiant fearlessness. Fear, she says, is the enemy of life. It's hard to love when you are afraid. It's hard to care when you are afraid. It's impossible to be joyful when you are afraid. Fear limits life, constrains life, pollutes life. Fear can be a good thing, she says, when it alerts us to danger. But when fear becomes overwhelming, it takes over, and living in fear is not really living. So the Bible tells us over and over again, do not fear. Fear is the enemy of life. It's true, isn't it? And yet what Isaiah is telling us, what the coming Christ promises us, is that there is an alternative, a defiant alternative to such fear. For in the words of another pastor, no wilderness is too wild for God to restore it, and no person or situation is so dead that God cannot find life in it. Good words, yes? Nice words. But we ask, how? How? For we too live in fearful times. We too sometimes find ourselves downright scared about our lives. We too sometimes fear the future. We too are afraid in the face of too many months that have more month than money. How will God make our deserts bloom? How will God make those dry and fearful places defiantly and wondrously bountiful? And maybe even more important, how can you and I emulate Isaiah's call for defiance in the face of fearfulness? Well, listen to these words again from Reverend Ott. She offers a powerful reminder of what it is that will cause fearfulness to flee. Think about it, she says. You can't argue anyone out of their fear. The only way to get rid of fear is to be loved out of it. When your little child wakes up in the middle of the night, terrified and screaming because there is a monster in the room under their bed, you don't get up and go to the doorway and say, you know, we've discussed this and that monsters are not real. Remember that? No. You rush into the room and you pull your child into your arms and you love him or her until it's not monsters that are being thought about, but your embracing, loving arms. That's the sort of defiant love that can indeed evict fear. I've seen such love that can indeed evict fear. I've seen such love, and so have you, in sometimes the most unlikely of places. I've seen it in the Muslim passengers on a bus in Kenya who, when their bus was attacked by Al-Qaeda terrorists, demanding that the Muslims identify the Christians so that they could be murdered, refused to do so. Instead, the Muslim women gave out headscarves to the Christian women, and one Muslim passenger said to the terrorists, "Either kill us all or leave us all alone." Defiant love indeed. I've seen it. I've seen it in the grizzled, bearded, cowboy hat-wearing Dallas man by the name of Justin Norman, who stood outside of a mosque in Irving, Texas, with a sign that proclaimed, "You belong, stay strong, be blessed, we are one America." He did so in reaction to the fact that by the time that he offered this simple, powerful witness, mosques all over the country had received hundreds of death threats and calls for exterminating all Muslims and praising Hitler's treatment of the Jews as a blueprint for how we should treat our Muslim brothers and sisters. Mr. Norman said this of his action, quote, "I remain Presbyterian, not Muslim. This wasn't about demonstrating my outrage. This was about binding up the wounded and showing compassion for the fearful and hurting. This was about my religion, not theirs." Defiant love, indeed. I've seen it. I've seen it in the white police officer by the name of Tim McMillan, who stopped a black teenager for texting and then wrote of that encounter with these words: "When I went to talk to the driver, I found a young black male who was looking at me, absolutely terrified, with his hands up. He said, 'What do you want me to do, officer?' His voice was quivering and he was absolutely petrified. I just looked at him for a moment because what I saw made me so very sad. I said to him, 'I just don't want you to get hurt. I want your mama always to have her baby boy. I want you to grow up and be somebody. I don't even want to write you a ticket. Just please pay attention and put the phone down.' I truly don't even care," Officer McMillan wrote. "I don't care whose fault it is that that young man was so scared to have a police officer at his window. I just wish somebody would fix it." Defiant love, indeed. All three of these stories about defiant love, in fact, show the way that we can begin to fix the fear, to overcome the hate, to make it just a little more possible for the deserts to bloom and the dry places become fertile. What about you? What acts of defiant love can you perform this Advent season, or in the coming weeks, or in the coming year? Most of us will not have the opportunity to do acts that make the news or go viral on Facebook or YouTube or blow up the Twitter sphere. But there is no question whatsoever that you and I can testify through our words and our actions to the life-giving power of God in even the driest of situations. One pastor says this of that opportunity, quote, "If you choose to be cynical, you can stack up plenty of evidence for despairing about the future. But we're free," she says. "We're free to make choices that lead us closer to God's dream or not. God calls, urges, challenges us to lean into a new future, a future whose foundations are compassion and justice and peace. God whispers in our depths of new possibilities for transforming our lives and this world." Did you notice what the stories of those Muslim bus passengers and that man in Texas and that police officer had in common? They were all indeed about defying what was expected. They were all indeed about loving the monsters out of the room. They were all acts that the cynical would say can't possibly make a difference. But the cynics are wrong. They are wrong. Love that defies what is expected, love that stands up for the neighbor, whatever their race or religion or their orientation or their immigration status or their gender, causes more blossoming crocuses to spring up amidst what looked like only dryness and dreariness. Marion White Edelman, president of the Children's Defense Fund, tells the story of Sojourner Truth, a brilliant and indomitable slave woman who could neither read nor write, but who was passionate about ending slavery and the second-class treatment of women. At the end of one of her anti-slavery talks in Ohio, a man came up to her and said, "Old woman, do you think that any of your talk about slavery will do any good? Do you suppose that people care what you say? Why, I don't care any more for your words and your talk than I do for the bite of a flea." "Perhaps not," she answered, "but Lord willing, I'll keep you scratching." May God keep you and me scratching at the sometimes dry earth with our words and our acts of defiant love, confident and trusting that God can and will blossom new life, new hope. And let us anticipate that day spoken of by Isaiah and embodied in the coming Christ, when indeed we too shall come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy on our heads, and we shall obtain gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. May it be so. May it be so.